The rain came down in sheets that night, hammering against the windshield of the big blue Kenworth as it roared down Interstate 40. The wipers squealed, the radio hissed static, and the world outside was nothing but blurred lines of gray and silver. Jack Hensley gripped the wheel tighter. He was 62, been driving trucks for almost 40 years, and he'd seen plenty of nights like this one. Nights that made the road feel like a dark ocean swallowing up every light in sight. He was hauling a load of furniture out of Amarillo, bound for Flagstaff. It was supposed to be an easy run. But between the storm, the fog, and the empty stretch of highway, it felt like the kind of night where ghosts could walk the shoulder and nobody would notice. Jack wasn't much of a religious man anymore. He'd grown up Catholic, said his prayers, went to church with his mom every Sunday back in Arkansas. But life had a way of sanding faith down, bit by bit. Divorce. Debt. His son in prison. Too many lonely miles between truck stops. So, when he saw her, at first, he thought his mind was just playing tricks on him. She stood by the side of the road, drenched in the storm. Not waving, not walking. Just standing still, like a statue in the mist. Jack squinted. The woman wore a long white shawl that looked ancient, almost glowing against the darkness. She didn't look like a hitchhiker. Didn't look like she belonged there at all. He slowed down, his tires spraying water across the shoulder. "Lord, what in the world?" he muttered under his breath. As the headlights washed over her, she turned her head, slowly, and met his eyes through the rain. There was no fear in her face, just a calmness that hit him like a memory of childhood, like the scent of his mama's rosary beads. Something deep inside told him to stop. Jack hit the brakes. The big rig hissed and shuddered to a stop beside her. He rolled down the window, rain splashing in. "You all right, ma'am?" he called out. The woman smiled faintly. Her voice, when she spoke, was soft but carried through the storm like music. "Would you give me a ride?" Jack hesitated. He'd picked up hitchhikers before, but never in a storm like this. Never anyone who looked like her. There was something about her presence, peaceful but heavy, sacred, even. "Yeah," he finally said, motioning toward the door. "Hop on in before you catch your death out there." She opened the passenger door with a slow, graceful motion and climbed inside. Her white shawl barely seemed wet, though she'd been standing in the rain. She smiled again, eyes bright like candlelight. "Thank you," she said softly. Jack cleared his throat, trying not to stare. "Ain't nothing. Roads are bad tonight. Where you headed?" She paused, looking out the windshield. "To where the lost are found," she said. Jack frowned. "That a town? Or?" She didn't answer. The CB radio crackled suddenly, making Jack jump. A trucker's voice came through. "Breaker 19, anybody else gettin' this storm like end times out here?" Jack chuckled nervously and picked up the mic. "You're tellin' me. Feels like the good Lord's ringin' out the clouds tonight." The woman smiled faintly again, but said nothing. For miles, the only sounds were the rain, the hum of the engine, and the occasional thunderclap. Jack couldn't help glancing at her. She wasn't young or old. Her face was ageless, her eyes deep like they'd seen every sunrise since time began. A small gold cross hung from her neck, shining dimly with each flash of lightning. He felt a strange warmth spreading through the cab, as though the heater had turned up, even though he hadn't touched it. Finally, he asked, "You got a name, ma'am?" She turned to him, her expression serene. "You may call me Mary." Jack chuckled nervously. "Mary, huh? Like the Virgin Mary?" Her gaze didn't waver. "Yes," she said simply. He laughed once, softly, but the sound died in his throat. There was something about her eyes, something that made his heart pound like he was a little boy sitting in church again, afraid the priest might read his sins aloud. "You're serious," he said quietly. "I am," she replied. He swallowed. "Okay, say I believe you. What are you doing out here, on a night like this?" She looked out the window again. "I go where I am needed. Tonight, I needed you to stop." Jack's hands tightened on the wheel. The road stretched ahead endlessly, glistening black under the rain. "Needed me? For what?" "To remember," she said softly. A chill ran down his spine. He didn't know what to say after that. He just drove. An hour passed, maybe more. The rain eased. The sky began to break open with streaks of moonlight. The air inside the cab felt different, still, clean, like after a prayer. And then, as they reached a lonely junction near an old gas station, Mary spoke again. "You can stop here," she said. Jack pulled over slowly. The station was abandoned. Broken signs, no lights, nothing but weeds and wind. "You sure this is your stop?" he asked. "Yes," she said, opening the door. "Thank you, Jack." He blinked. How'd you know my name?" She smiled gently. "I've known you since before you were born." Jack felt his throat tighten. "Lady, But she was already stepping down, the wind catching her shawl. The rain had stopped entirely now, and a faint glow surrounded her as she turned back to face him one last time. "Tell your son," she said softly, "that he is forgiven." Jack froze. "My son? What? How do you?" She smiled once more, and then, she was gone. Not like someone walking away. Not like someone hiding. Just gone, like the night had swallowed her whole. Jack leapt out of the cab, looking around wildly. Nothing but silence and the distant rumble of thunder far away. The air smelled of roses. He stood there for a long time, trembling, staring at the empty road. When he finally got back in the truck, his hands were shaking. He turned the ignition, and the radio came to life again, this time playing a hymn he hadn't heard in decades, Ave Maria. He didn't remember turning the station. And as the truck rolled forward once more, he felt tears in his eyes. Because somewhere deep inside, he knew, he hadn't just given a stranger a ride. He had met the Mother of God. Jack didn't sleep that night. He pulled into a truck stop just outside Flagstaff around dawn, parked the rig, and sat in silence. His knuckles were white on the steering wheel. The storm had passed, leaving the desert sky pink and gold, like it was freshly painted by heaven itself. He replayed every second of what happened. The woman in white. The warmth in the cab. The way she'd said his name. The way she'd vanished. And those last words. "Tell your son that he is forgiven." His son, Matthew, had been in prison for almost 5 years now. Armed robbery. Wrong friends, wrong night. Jack hadn't spoken to him in almost 2. The last call had ended with shouting and a slammed receiver. Jack had said something cruel, that he wished he'd never raised him. It had haunted him ever since, but he'd buried it under miles of asphalt and diesel fumes. Now that sentence echoed like thunder in his chest. Forgiven. He got out of the cab and walked toward the diner. The morning air was crisp, filled with the smell of coffee and fried eggs. A waitress with tired eyes poured him a cup. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said. He almost laughed. "Something like that. Storm messed up a lot of folks' nerves last night," she said. "Heard a few drivers swearing they saw things on the highway. One guy said he saw a lady in white walking right down the middle of the road." Jack froze, his spoon halfway to his mouth. Yeah. Guess the lightning does strange things to people's eyes." She chuckled and walked off to another booth. But Jack wasn't laughing. He stirred his coffee and whispered under his breath, "She was real." He pulled out his wallet. Inside was an old photo of him and Matthew, taken when his boy was just 10. They were fishing by the Arkansas River, both smiling, holding a catfish half as big as the kid himself. Jack hadn't looked at that photo in years. He felt the sting of tears. By noon, he made up his mind. He finished his delivery, signed the papers, and told dispatch he was taking a few days off. Then he pointed the Kenworth east, toward Oklahoma, toward the state prison where Matthew was serving time. The road was long and dry this time, but his thoughts were loud. Every few miles, he swore he could smell roses again, faintly, though the air was hot and dusty. He turned off the radio, but the silence inside the cab didn't feel empty. It felt peaceful. Somewhere near Albuquerque, a small roadside chapel appeared, one of those little white stucco ones with a statue of the Virgin Mary out front. Normally, he would have driven right by. But not this time. He pulled over. Inside, it was quiet, except for the hum of a ceiling fan and the flicker of candles. The statue of Mary stood at the front, hands open, eyes downcast, draped in white. Jack knelt slowly, his knees creaking. He hadn't prayed in 20 years. Didn't even know what to say anymore. Hi, he whispered awkwardly. It's been a while. He exhaled and rubbed his face. I don't know if what I saw was real. Maybe I'm going crazy. Maybe not. But, if that was you, if it was really you, thank you. I got the message. He hesitated, his throat tightening. Please, watch over him. Watch over my boy. When he stood up again, he noticed something that made his heart stop. There, on the base of the statue, someone had left a small white rose. Fresh. Dew still on the petals. Jack stared. Then he smiled. All right, Mary. I get it. He got back on the road, lighter somehow, like a weight had lifted from his shoulders. 2 days later, he arrived at the prison. The guard at the gate recognized his name. You here to see your son? Yeah, Jack said. I need to see him. When Matthew walked into the visiting room, Jack almost didn't recognize him. His boy had gotten thinner, older. But his eyes, those were still the same, the ones from that fishing trip all those years ago. They sat down across from each other. For a long time, neither spoke. Finally, Jack said softly, You look good, son. Matthew shrugged. Better than last year, I guess. Jack took a deep breath. I came here because I had a dream. Or maybe it wasn't a dream. I don't know what to call it. Matthew frowned. What kind of dream? I picked up a woman on the highway. She said her name was Mary. She told me to tell you that you're forgiven. Matthew's jaw tightened. He looked down at the table. You don't gotta say that just to make me feel better, Dad. I ain't. I swear. Jack leaned forward, his voice trembling. She knew things nobody else could have known. She said your name before I told her anything. It was her. It was the Virgin Mary, I'm sure of it. Matthew shook his head, blinking hard. Dad, you know I used to pray every night after they locked me up? I used to ask her to forgive me for what I did. But after a while, I figured she wasn't listening anymore. Jack reached across the table, his rough hand covering his son's. She was listening, son. She was. She came to me to tell you that. For the first time in years, Matthew met his father's eyes, and smiled. A real, broken, tearful smile. Then maybe I can forgive myself too. Jack nodded, tears rolling down his cheeks. That's the point, boy. That's the whole point. They talked for hours after that, about old memories, about faith, about starting over when Matthew got out. It was the first time they'd spoken like family in a decade. When the guards came to end the visit, Matthew stood and said, Hey, Dad, thanks for coming. And, if you ever see her again, tell her thank you for me. Jack smiled through his tears. I will. He left the prison that afternoon under a bright sky, the air crisp and clean. A single white feather drifted down from nowhere, landing on his windshield. He stared at it for a long moment, heart full. All right, Mary, he whispered. Message received. That night, he parked his truck on a high overlook, facing the sunset. The horizon glowed red and gold. For the first time in decades, he took off his cap, bowed his head, and prayed, not for miracles, not for money, not for forgiveness. Just in gratitude. Because somehow, he knew she was still out there, somewhere on the road, somewhere between the storms and the silence, bringing messages to the lost souls who needed to hear them most. Months passed. Autumn turned to winter, and Jack Hensley kept on trucking, but he wasn't the same man anymore. Something inside him had shifted that rainy night. It was subtle at first, a quiet peace that followed him everywhere. He didn't curse at traffic like he used to. He stopped drinking whiskey in the cab. He even started praying again before long hauls, something he hadn't done since the 1980s. Other drivers noticed. Hensley, one guy said over the CB, you sound different, man. You on some new meds or something? Jack laughed. Nah, just quit running from my own mess for once. He began keeping a small white rosary on the dash, right under the windshield. Whenever the sun hit it, it threw bright specks of light across the cabin, like tiny halos dancing in the dust. But the real change came 2 months later. He got a call from the prison chaplain. Mr. Hensley, the voice said, Your son, Matthew, he's being released early. Good behavior. He'll be out next week." Jack nearly dropped the phone. "You're serious?" "Serious as the sunrise," the chaplain said. "Said he's been helping with the chapel ministry. Seems to have turned his life around." When Jack hung up, he just sat there in silence, staring at the steering wheel. Then he laughed, cried, and whispered, "You really don't quit on folks, do you, Mary?" He picked up Matthew from the prison gates a week later. His son walked out wearing a plain gray jacket, holding a cardboard box with all his things. They hugged for a long time. Neither spoke. There wasn't anything left to say that their hearts hadn't already said. They drove home together in Jack's rig. No radio, no small talk. Just the rumble of the road. "Where you headed after this?" Jack finally asked. Matthew looked out the window. "Thought maybe I'd get a job at one of those trucking depots. Maybe work the yard. Start clean." Jack grinned. "Good. Maybe someday I'll teach you how to drive one of these beasts." Matthew chuckled. "You'd trust me behind the wheel?" Jack nodded. "If the Virgin Mary trusts you enough to forgive you, I guess I can too." That night, they ate dinner together for the first time in years. Just stew and cornbread, but it felt like a feast. Jack kept glancing out the window, half expecting to see a shimmer of white by the road. He didn't, not yet. A few weeks later, Jack took a haul up through northern New Mexico, same stretch of highway where it all began. The sky was heavy with clouds again, gray and brooding, like the storm from that night. Halfway through the run, the truck started sputtering. Fuel gauge looked fine. Engine temp normal. But the lights flickered, and the radio went dead. Jack pulled over onto the shoulder. Don't you start this now," he muttered, climbing out to check under the hood. The wind was strong, carrying the smell of rain. He wiped his hands on a rag, cursing under his breath. But then, just like before, he saw her. A figure in white, standing across the road. He froze. This time, she wasn't alone. Next to her stood a small boy, maybe 7 or 8 years old, barefoot, holding her hand. The boy's face glowed like sunlight through glass. Jack stepped forward, heart pounding. "Mary!" She smiled. "Jack." He swallowed hard. "Is this real again, or am I dreamin'?" "Both," she said gently. "The heart always dreams when it believes." He nodded slowly, eyes stinging. "That night, you told me to tell my son he was forgiven. You were right. He's out now. He's trying, Mary. We both are." "I know," she said. "And that is why I came again." The boy beside her smiled. "He's proud of you," the child said softly. His voice was like bells in the rain. Jack frowned. "Who's proud of me?" The boy tilted his head. "Your father. He's with us." Jack felt a lump in his throat. His father had died 30 years ago, a hard man, a farmer who'd never said much more than work harder or keep going. Now, tears rolled down his cheeks. I wasn't sure he ever forgave me." The woman stepped closer. "He did. He's been waiting for you to forgive yourself." Lightning flashed in the distance. The wind whipped around them, but Mary and the boy stood untouched. "Jack," she said softly, "there are many on this road who have lost their way, just like you once did. You must help them find it again." He blinked. "Help, Em? How?" "By driving where they can't go. By listening when they speak. By being kind when the world is cruel." He chuckled through his tears. "I'm just a trucker, ma'am." Mary's eyes glowed gently. "That's all you need to be." And then she and the boy began to fade, like mist dissolving in sunlight. Jack shouted, "Wait! Will I see you again?" Her voice lingered in the air, "Every time you stop for a soul in need." Then they were gone. Jack climbed back into the truck, trembling. He turned the key, and the engine roared to life as if nothing had ever been wrong. The radio came back too, playing the same hymn as before, Ave Maria. He smiled through his tears. "All right then. I'll keep drivin'." From that day on, Jack Hensley became known among truckers for something strange. They said if your rig broke down in the middle of nowhere, if you were stuck in the dark or lost or hopeless, Sometimes a blue Kenworth would pull up beside you. The driver, an older man with kind eyes and a rosary on the dash, would offer you a hot cup of coffee, a listening ear, and words that somehow made your heart lighter. And then, when you tried to thank him, you'd notice something odd, a small white rose sitting on your seat after he drove away. Nobody knew where the flowers came from. Jack never said. But every time he left one behind, he whispered the same prayer under his breath. "Thank you, Mary. Keep watch over him." Years later, when Jack passed away peacefully in his sleep inside his parked rig, the highway patrol found something that made them stop cold. The engine was off, the doors locked, but the cab smelled faintly of roses. And on the passenger seat lay a folded white shawl, perfectly clean, untouched by dust or time. They say the truck started itself when they tried to tow it, rolling gently forward down the empty road, as if it knew where it was going. Some drivers still claim to see it on stormy nights, a blue Kenworth gliding through the rain, headlights soft, never swerving, always steady. And if you look close enough, they say you can see her in the passenger seat, the Virgin Mary, her white shawl glowing like moonlight, smiling as she rides with the man who once gave her a lift.